Do you need more time?
Doctor, I can't see the slide. I mean, the question.
Really? Can anybody else see the slide?
Yes, doctor. But this issue also occurred during the online quiz with the NNET.
Okay. But most of you can see the slides, right? Can you?
Okay, now I can see it.
Now
I can.
Actually, there's a lagging in the internet data, so you might have to wait for some time.
Right.
Okay.
Here, doctor.
Okay. Can I proceed, please?
I think can.
Right. Okay. Everyone done? I will allow for the Tafis to start his lecture.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Dr. Liana.
All right.
Okay. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera and good morning to every one of you. Because yesterday when during the classes there is some problems with my internet connection probably, so it seems to be breaking off on and on. So if that happens again today, please stop me and so that I can repeat things that you couldn't hear, or maybe there's some lagging in the internet. Okay, so I need your cooperation to basically stop me and then before I proceed further. Okay, but is there anything that you want me to repeat the class yesterday that you think you are not clear of? Before I start with the thyroid and parathyroid hormones today? Anyone? No. Okay, if not, then yeah, anyone? Everyone should be okay then. So I will start today's class. Okay, I'll start with the pointer. Okay, today we are going to look at the thyroid and the parathyroid hormones and look at the learning outcome. Okay, there are about 6 learning outcomes. So we'll start by describing the functional anatomy and also history of the thyroid and parathyroid glands and the chemistry and synthesis of the thyroid hormones. And when you look at the synthesis also on calcitonin and parathyroid and later on vitamin D. And then we look at the total endocrine control of calcium and phosphorus homeostasis. Okay, which means that basically these 3 or 4 hormones, they are important in regulation of calcium and phosphorus homeostasis. Okay, so we'll look at it. So we start with the next one. Okay, the first slide. You already know about the hypothyroid pituitary adrenal. The axis, there's a thyroid axis. Okay, so you know the negative feedback and how it actually been controlling the secretion of thyroid hormones T3 and T4. Okay, so there's a chart. This is the diagram to show you basically that the hypothalamus is receiving all these, integrating all this information from severe stress, circadian rhythm, acute psychosis, and cold. All this is going to affect hypothalamus function. So this is going to basically stimulate the release of TRH. And we know that TRH release is going to be secreted in the media amina, okay? And from there, it travels to the anterior pituitary, where it actually acts on, okay, where it actually acts on the thyrotropes to start releasing TSH. And we know that TRH is going to act on tropes, okay, increase IP3, DAG, so basically allow the increase in intracellular calcium that release TSH. TSH then is going to go to the thyroid glands. Okay, now we see what happens when TSH acts on the thyroid glands. Okay, so look to the next slide. Okay, so this is basically to tell you about the whole thing about hypothyroid pituitary thyroid axis. Hypothalamus releasing TRH, thyroid releasing hormones acts on the pituitary, and the pituitary is going to act on the to release TSH, and TSH is acts on the thyroid glands that is going to produce a T3 and T4, and this is going to be circulating to all the body cell, and basically all our body cell have thyroid receptors. Okay, so the anterior pituitary actually secrete TSH is controlled by hypothalamus releasing hormones, which is secreted at the nerve ending in the medial. Basically transported to the anterior pituitary by the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal blood, basically the portal vein. Okay, TRH directly then affect the anterior pituitary gland cells to secrete the output that is TSH. So this is another aspect of the regulation. So here basically TRH is going to act on the GQ receptors, activating phospholipase C, cause increase in IP3, DAG, and exocytosis and release of TSH into the systemic circulation. TSH is transported and bind to TSH receptor, which is GS, protein cover receptors located on the basolateral membrane. And here you have to be very careful because it's located on the basolateral membrane of the follicular cell or follicular epithelial cell. And you know GS is basically going to activate adenyl cyclase, increase CMP, and then you have PKA. They're basically going to basically T3, T4, and then the negative feedback to inhibit TSH release.
Doctor,
Yes.
sorry, I think you got cut off. After the PKA, what happened?
After the PKA, so the PKA basically is going to act on all the steps. Basically, is going to act on the protein synthesis. It means the enzyme formation and all these things. And this is going to basically basically stimulate all the steps involved in thyroid hormone synthesis. Is that okay? Until the exocytosis of T3 and T4. Here I didn't put T3, basically also T3 and T4, because it's quite difficult to actually try to write that. Okay, so from here, once the T3, T4 that is released, this T4 and T3, they will be circulating and they basically bind, because this is not very soluble, so they bind to the proteins to be transported, the transport protein. From there, they are transported to the cell. Most of them are actually released as T4 and some as T3. So the T4 release will be converted in the cell to become T3, and we know that T3 is more active compared to T4. And this T3 basically negative feedback to suppress TSH release. Okay. And it not just on the anterior pituitary, it also negative feedback on the hypothalamus to reduce TRH, which is basically also to reduce the TSH secretion. Okay. So the another aspect, we look at thyroid regulation, hormone secretion. Basically, this is to maintain, because of this both short lobe and also long lobe of regulation, is mainly to maintain the normal level of metabolic activity in the body precisely. So the precise right amount of thyroid hormone must be secreted all the time. So as the THs, as the T3 and T4 being released, this level is going to increase. Yeah. So TSH is actually known as, this is understood. So the most important event, or the most important early effect after the administration of TSH, you can see is basically initiate proteolysis of the thyroid globulin. That means there is proteolysis of thyroid globulin, which cause the release of thyroxine, T3, or thyroid T3 into the blood within 30 minutes. So if we give external source of TSH, what we actually find initially within the first 30 minutes is there's increased proteolysis of thyroid globulin, okay, to basically release T3 and T4 from the okay, somebody is clicking on the request for the audio control. Okay, the next slide. So we basically finished the activity 4.1, which basically look at hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis and how this axis basically T3 and T4 release. So basically it's regulating its own release. Okay. So in the activity 4.2, we look at the anatomy of the thyroid glands, the location of thyroid glands and innervation, and also the blood supply, and where's the where we can find the follicular cell. There's basically the parafollicular cell, the C cell, and this is the whole thing is basically the follicular cell. Okay, and you have parafollicular cell, and this is the colloid. Okay, basically thyroid globulin is formed and stored, and basically in the lumen. So you know that here is the basolateral site. The one facing the lumen is known as the apical site or the luminal site. This is where the colloid is stored. Our thyroid globulin is basically composed of all this. Okay, the colloid is composed of thyroid globulin. And then in between you have a lot of blood vessels, basically capillaries. So the basolateral site is actually facing the blood supply, the capillaries, and the apical.
Doctor? Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, your voice cut off.
Okay, my voice cut off. Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at looking at the histological aspect of the thyroid glands, you look at the follicular cell. These are all the follicular cell that is in green in color. The red in color is the colloid, and this is mostly composed of the thyroid globulin. Okay. So we have to be very careful in the sense that here, you look, this side is the basolateral side, which is facing the capillaries. And the one that facing the colloid is the apical side or the luminal side. Okay, this is where most of this is where insulin is trapped and taken into the cell, and this is where thyroid globulin that is produced is secreted into the colloid. Is that okay? Okay. The darker green are the C cell, basically the parafollicular cell that produce the calcium. Is there any questions?
Doctor, you got cut off again.
I got cut off again. Is there anything that I miss out that I have not mentioned that you have actually missed out? I was actually very near to my data. It's very high. I think there's something wrong to the Unify. It's okay. I tried to fix it, but they haven't come and repair it yet. Okay, I repeat again. The basolateral side is the side that is facing the capillaries. The luminous side or the apical side is the one that facing the colloid or where thyroglobulin is stored. Is that okay? And the one in the dark green color is the C cell or the parafollicular cell. This produces the calcitonin. Okay, and this is the follicular cell that is producing your T3 and T4. Okay, I'll move. Anatomy of the thyroid gland. Basically, these are large gland, and actually it's the largest endocrine gland in our body. It was around 25 grams. Remember, the adrenal gland is only about 2 grams or even 3 grams, so it's like 10 times smaller than the thyroid gland. And this thyroid gland is the only gland that you can actually feel externally. That means you can actually palpate, or you can actually palpate. It's very close or near to the trachea, the larynx and the trachea. And it shapes like a butterfly. You can see that the shape is like a butterfly, and there are 2 lobes, the left and the right lobe, and usually the right lobe is slightly bigger than the left lobe, and there's an isthmus, the bridge that connect them. Okay, and we know that basically the right lobe is larger, and that's why they are slightly asymmetrical. And usually for the woman, the gland is slightly larger compared to the man. Okay, and then it's basically covered by a thin fibrous shaft or capsule. And this basically capsule enter into the gland and form the septum that divide the thyroid tissue into a microscopic lobule. So if you look at this, you can see basically like a lobules, right? Because of the capsule that actually penetrate and it separate it and become a lobules. Yeah, and then it control the metabolic rate, protein synthesis, and control body sensitivity to other hormones. So basically, because we know that thyroid receptors are present in all cells, so it's actually required for metabolic rate, or it actually control our metabolic rate or maintain our basal metabolic rate. Without thyroid hormones, the person is going to have a low metabolic rate. So basically, the person is going to feel very cold. So it's hyperthyroidism. These are the first effect that the person is going to feel. Okay, the cellular composition of the thyroid gland, we know that majority of them consists of follicular cell, and basically these are epithelial cells that involved in hormones lining the capillary, provide the blood supply to the follicular cell, the capillaries. As I say, is that the basolateral side is facing the endothelium or the capillaries where they get all the blood supply. Okay, and then the follicular cell, parafollicular cell, or C cell, is the one that produces calcitonin for calcium metabolism. Okay, the rest you have fibroblast, lymphocyte, and also adipocyte that is present. The blood supply. So the arterial blood supply basically derived from the superior and inferior thyroid artery. The vein form plexuses on the surface of the glands and on the front of the trachea, which gives rise to the superior, middle, and inferior thyroid glands, and later it drains into the internal jugular and innominate vein. There are lymphatic vessels in the thyroid seat and right lymphatic trunk. Innervation to the thyroid gland is provided through the middle and inferior cervical ganglion of sympathetic nervous system. Okay, which means that when you activate sympathetic nervous system, okay, so
Doctor, your voice cut off the last sentence.
The last sentence.
Yeah.
The last sentence. Okay. The last sentence is about the sympathetic ganglia. So the innervation supply are mainly provided by the medial and inferior cervical ganglia of the sympathetic nerve. Okay, this sympathetic nerve basically directly innervate the thyroid glands. Okay, if you activate the sympathetic nerve, which means that there will be increase in thyroid hormone release. Okay, follicular unit. Okay, so basically the thyroid follicle is a functional unit. Okay, it's a functional unit of thyroid glands. It consists of layers of thyroid epithelial cell arranged around a large cervical cavity filled with colloid. And we know that these colloid are basically the thyroid globuli. Okay, and morphologically and functionally, they are polarized. When we say polarized, which means that it has lateral surface.
Sorry, Doctor, it's cut out. Yeah, polarized.
Okay, what we mean by functionally polarized, which means that it has an apical surface, okay, where it faces the follicular lumen, which contain the colloid, and also the lateral surface, basolateral surface that face the capillaries, okay? And on each side of the compartment, it has specific function, which means that the apical side, very specific function, basolateral side, also very specific function because of the presence of proteins or special proteins, okay? The structure of the thyroxine. So basically, you look at this is the thyroxine. What other hormones is also produced from thyroxine? Anyone? And we know thyroxine is an amino acid.
Catecholamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine.
So basically, the epinephrine and norepinephrine are even dopamine. And the structure wise is basically this is the thyroxine, okay, and then from there, the most important thing is the ring, yeah. So there are how many carbons? Okay, we can later go into the details. The next one, okay, the biochemistry of synthesis. So the thyroxines are basically because of the ring and the oxygen basically to bind them together. And this is where you have two. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 3, and 5. So basically here is 5. So you have the T3. T3 is basically 335 thyroglobulin. So basically this is where it's formed. Yeah. And T3, and you have T4. This is the reverse T3. This is the thyroglobulin. There's T3. This is 353. So it's 3353. So this is T3. If you have a reverse, you have 3. Yeah. Okay, on the reverse side, it's basically 335. So if there's a reverse, that means this is usually non-functional. Okay. Compared to T4, they basically have the whole thing T3, 3535. So they are basically the whole, this one will give you the T4. Okay. So we look at the next one, slide. Okay, the formation. So thyroid hormones basically derive from two iodinated thyroxine molecule. Just a moment, just take a break for a while.
All right, Doctor.
Sorry, there's a disturbance. Molecule, which means there must be two iodinated tyrosine molecule. So if this tyrosine molecule will be iodinated to tyrosine peroxidase, okay, the iodine molecules will then attach to either the 3 and 5, 3 and 5. And it's actually present on the thyroglobulin string, okay. So here, it will be basically help the thyroid peroxidase help to basically bind to iodinated thyroxines to become either T3 or T4. Okay, so the fabrication of thyroid hormones is basically conducted by the thyroid peroxidase, and these are very important hormones. The enzymes, and these enzymes is under the control of TSH. Okay. So the identification of tyrosine on thyroglobulin is known as organification of iodide, and also the synthesis of tyrosines and triiodotyrosine, that's T3 and T4. Hormones, I mean, basically this one already know, I just put it in here, so I just move on the next one. Okay. This is the regulation talking about hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, and this one already explains and how it actually works, and this is another pictures that show you a bit more detail on the aspect of the T3. I mean the thyroid tropes here. You have the activation of G protein coupled receptor, that's GQ, and then here is on the follicular cell, the TSH receptor, which is activate your GS, so increase adenyl cyclase. Okay, synthesis of the hormones. So there are many steps and details. So this is a nice pictures that is shown. So it started with the attachment of, okay, see we can find where is the attachment of T4. The GS protein coupled receptors, it actually increased the activity of sodium iodide co-transporter, which basically transport iodide and also sodium into the cell. And this also actually be activated by your sodium potassium pump. Okay, the sodium potassium pump is the one that generate the low concentration of sodium intracellularly by extruding calcium out from the cell. So they allow the sodium to transport through the co-transporter. In the meantime, when the sodium enter into the cell, iodide is also transported together into the cell. Okay, this is the first stage. The second stage is as iodide is leaving the cell via pendrin. This is basically the another transporter that allow iodide, because the concentration of iodide intracellularly is high, it will be actually transported out by the pendrin. And this is another place where the thyroid before actually present in the colloid, okay, for binding to the thyroxine molecule for iodinification. So the third stage is where the iodinification occurred also under the influence of TSH that stimulate the iodine binding to thyroxine molecule present on the thyroid globulin. Okay. And then the fourth one, you have conjugation, also stimulated by TSH, where the two molecules of thyroxines that have been iodinated combined on the molecule of thyroglobulin. Okay, so they either become T3, T4, or even the reverse T3. Okay, then this molecule is actually endosized by the follicular cell. Okay, so this is peculiar in the sense that most of the hormones is actually produced in the cytoplasm, but thyroid hormones, they are produced endosized into the I cut off? Hello?
Yes, Doctor.
Yes, Doctor.
So I am cut off. Okay, I came to about conjugation, right?
Yeah, you were talking about where it's being synthesized.
Okay, so the peculiar synthesis of thyroid hormones is actually synthesized in the colloid rather than in the cytoplasm. Okay, from there, this colloid, I mean this thyroid globulin with T3, T4 already being formed on the thyroid globulin is endosized, which means that it's taken into the cell again and become endocytic vesicles. Okay, in here you have the MIT or DIT, basically, both of them present in the endocytic vesicles where it combines with the lysosome. Okay, the endocytosis is also stimulated by TSH. Okay, and then
Doctor, your voice got off again.
okay. On the step 5, that's where endocytosis occur, and this is stimulated by the TSH. Okay, and then on the step 6, this is where proteolysis occurred, where it remove or it separate the T3 and T4 from the thyroglobulin. And then because we know that T3 and T4, they are soluble, lipid soluble, so they basically exit the cell or the vesicles from directly, and then from there it exit and then get into the blood vessel, blood systemic circulation. Okay, so the seventh step, there's secretion is basically also stimulated by TSH. So starting from the first step until the 7 steps, it is all under TSH regulation. Okay, and the final one is basically TSH also is the one that actually regulate the growth of the follicles. Okay, follicular cell. The whole steps that basically talk about the synthesis. So you started the first step by trapping iodide. So where is the source of our iodide? It's basically from the food that we take in. Okay, this will be trapped by the follicular cell, and this is basically against the concentration gradient. So how does it generate the concentration gradient? By creating the sodium gradient through the sodium potassium pump. They actually pump out sodium to generate intracellular sodium level that is lower than compared to the extracellular. So sodium, 2 molecule of sodium that is taken in allowed to take in 1 molecule of iodide. So it's able to trap iodide in. So the first step. Second step is oxidation of iodide to become iodine, and its effect is by thyroid peroxidase. Thyroid peroxidase is present on the basolateral side, on the luminous side or the apical side of the cell membrane. So this enzymes is actually present on the cell membrane on the apical and iodine. Okay, before it's actually released into the colloid. So once in the colloid, iodinification occurred. Iodinification basically will attach the iodine to the thyroxine molecule that is present on the thyroid globulin. Okay, then you have conjugation. Conjugation, basically these 2 molecules join together. So if they happens to be close with only 2 molecules of 2 molecules of iodine is attached to the thyroid globulin. So you have 4 molecules, this one becomes T4. So here, if you have only 1 molecule and here got 2 molecules, basically you get T3. Okay, and then you have the reverse form. Okay, and then finally the form, then you have endocytosis. Endocytosis iodinated thyroglobulin. So this one will be taken in to become endocytic vesicles. And then from there, you have a lysosome that combine with it to cause proteolysis. And finally, T3 and T4 or thyroxine, they are lipid soluble. So they basically exit from the vesicles, endoplasmic, cytoplasmic vesicles. So the balance of the thyroglobulin will be recycled back, okay? Recycled back through the cell machineries. From there, they reform again into the thyroglobulin to be secreted, okay? And also the iodide or the iodide that is not being utilized will then be recirculated back to become iodine again. Okay. Move on. Any questions so far from the synthesis of
thyroid? Yeah, doctor, the TSH receptor is also on the luminal side.
TSH receptor is only present on the basolateral side. This diagram doesn't show you, so it's actually here. You see my pointer here? Okay, this is where TSH receptor. Yes, the red pointer. TSH will attach here. What does it do is GS is going to activate adenyl cyclase, increase its CAMP, pKa, that allow all these processes to basically occur. So, okay.
Yes, yes.
So remember that the TSH receptor is on the basolateral side. Why is it on the basolateral side? Because the basolateral side is facing the blood vessel, the capillaries. Capillary is the one that actually going to bring your TSH from the anterior pituitary coming down, and from here it's going to exit from the capillaries. Okay, any other questions?
Doctor, what is DIT and MIT? And its
This is
pending?
mono and di. There's a different only. The mono is basically when you have only one molecule. Okay, this is called mono. Okay, and then you have di where you have two.
And is pendrin basically a channel protein for iodine or iodide?
Is there yeah, pendrin is a channel that allows iodide to actually exit. Okay, iodide molecules exit because they are charged molecules, so it cannot exit through the cell membrane, so it need a transporter, and this transporter is known as pendrin. Okay, and near the pendrin here you have thyroid peroxidase also present on the luminous surface that basically going to oxidize iodide to become iodine.
Oh, so the pendrin contains thyroxidase peroxidase.
No, pendrin is a transporter. But nearby here, you have thyroid peroxidase. So these thyroid peroxidase, they are basically present on the luminous surface.
All right, I understand.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any more? Because this is very important that you must understand the whole process of synthesis.
Doctor, the hyperplasia within the thyroid gland is stimulated by TSH, is it?
Yes. So TSH. Yes. TSH basically stimulates not just the whole process of synthesis of thyroid hormones, it also synthesis the proliferation of the follicular cell. That means the growth of the follicular cell. So it means that if you have a lot of TSH that is coming down, all these follicular cell is going to multiply. Basically, they are going to basically multiply, and there are more and more follicular cell that is being formed. Is that okay? So it's basically also like a growth factor or growth effect on the follicular cell.
And doctor, the last thing I wanted to ask was regarding
Okay.
TSH. So when binds to
Okay.
receptors on the basolateral membrane, it doesn't directly activate the sodium iodide cotransporter. First, it activates the sodium potassium pump, right?
Yes, the first thing you activate the sodium potassium pump, but you also there will be an increase. When it activates the, just remember that when, yes. Okay, the TSH, yeah, your TSH, when it binds to your receptor, the TSH receptor, which is G protein coupled receptors, is going to activate AC, increase CAMP, okay, that actually activates your PKA. The things about PKA is basically is an enzyme that's going to activate a lot of enzymatic formation. That means it's going to cause a lot of enzymatic formation, including gene synthesis of the enzymes and also transporter. So it basically is going to actually increase the sodium potassium pump that is present here, and also going to increase the sodium iodide transporter, and also pendrin, and also tyrosine peroxidase. So all this thing is basically going to be activated and also increase endocytotic of the vesicles, which means that more of this is going to be happening. Even the formation of lysosome and enzyme. These processes and the enzyme formation, including the transporter and also the enzymes that is required. Is that okay? Jana?
Yes, doctor, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I just see that here is basically the red one. This is basically the capillaries. Actually, the endothelial cell is a bit smaller. It should be basically a big, huge endothelial cell. Okay. So whatever the hormones that is secreted, because it's lipid soluble, it basically directly diffuse out. And we don't know is there any transporter here. So I don't think there's any transporter because it basically diffuse out, go into the circulation. And from here, it binds to the transport protein to be transported to other parts of the body or to other cells. Okay. Can I move on? Or you have more questions? No? Okay, I will just move on. This is, okay, large number of closed follicular cell. Basically, you know that there are large number follicular cell, and this is the colloid. Okay, this is an artifact. Basically, it's actually fill out the whole lumen that is surrounded by the follicular cell. Okay, and then this follicular cell basically contain glycoprotein, which is a thyroglobulin. Okay, and then you have endoplasmic reticulum that basically secrete and synthesize the thyroglobulin. And in all the follicular cell, you have this endoplasmic reticulum. They are the one that synthesize the thyroglobulin. And you know that thyroglobulin in the colloid, it also contain the hormones T3 and T4, but it need to be endosized into the follicular cell before it's been proteolyzed and then separated to become T3 and T4. Okay, so this is the iodine. We talk about iodine, that is basically required for the iodine is very important. So in some areas where previously people do not know, there is lack of iodine. So basically T3 and T4 is not able to be formed or not enough to be formed. So you know that some of these children, they are not able to grow properly. Okay, and they also have an enlarged thyroid glands, goiter. So some of these young children, they actually have that. But now, most of the time, we actually can add iodine or iodide into the water, so that can actually help to increase the formation of thyroid hormones. Okay, so to form the normal quantity of thyroxine, we need about 50 milligrams of ingested iodine or iodide in the form of iodide required each year, which means that on average, you require about 1 milligram per week. So if you take seafood, seaweeds, and all these things, it contain very high iodine or iodides. Okay, so the iodine ingested orally will be absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract. From there, iodine or iodide actually is being removed from the circulating cell by the thyroid hormone. Is by sodium iodide symporter, and this symporter is actually activated by TSH. So there will be a lot of symporter that is formed on the basolateral side of the follicular cell. Okay, so the basal membrane of the thyroid cell has specific ability to pump iodide actively. Pump in the sense that this is a symporter, so the pumps actually depend on sodium potassium pump that basically remove sodium out in from the cytosol. Okay, so this basically reduce the sodium in there and allow the sodium iodide symporter to function more effectively. So even we say there is a pump, basically it depends on sodium potassium ATPase. Okay, so it can actually increase trapping of the iodide to a very high concentration of 30 times more than that is present in the blood. Okay, any questions? I think this is just repeating on what I have said earlier. So you can read it on your own. I just proceed from here. So the most important step, the first step is the formation of thyroid hormone is basically to convert iodide ions to iodine, and it's basically directly affected by thyroid peroxidase. Okay. Thyroid hormones, this is another aspect. We just look at it. So I just go to the next one. Okay, summary of the thyroid hormone synthesis. This is another way, another nice picture. You can actually look at it. So you look at this is the basolateral side. This is where the presence of the sodium iodide symporter. Your endoplasmic reticulum is the one that secrete your thyroglobulin. So you have exocytosis of thyroglobulin that is being formed, okay, into the colloid. And then from here, there's endocytosis of after the conjugation. And when you combine with your lysosome, it proteolyzes and release your T3 and T4 from the thyroglobulin. Okay. Then the control, the same thing. This is still, we already know, basically, other brain can influence thyroid hypothalamus, temperature, even temperature regulatory center, environmental influence can actually influence the thyroid hypothalamus to release T3, TRH, TSH, T3, T4, and this basically will then increase heat production, because we talk about metabolism. By increased metabolism of carbohydrate, protein, and fat, that's going to generate heat that basically negative feedback on your temperature regulatory center. So this is the one that is actually influencing the hypothalamus to either increase or release TRH. So if our body temperature increases higher than normal, it's going to inhibit TRH release. Okay. That we talk about, so I just move on to the next one. Okay. So the thyroid hormone release and transport. So about 93% of the thyroid hormone released from the thyroid gland normally is thyroxine, that's T4. Only 7% is T3. And we know that T3 is more effective or more effect compared to T4. Okay. So, however, during the ensuing days, half of this thyroxine will slowly be deiodinated to increase the T3. That means half of them are deiodinated in the cell. Okay, if you go into the cell, it will deioninated to become T3. So basically, the T3 and T4 are T3 will have more effect compared to T4. Okay, so the combine of T3 and T4 mainly on the thyrobiodine globulin, and to a certain extent transferring albumin. So these are the transport protein that transport T3 and T4 to the cell. Okay, so the binding to the carrier protein basically is lipid soluble. Yeah.
Doctor, you were cut.
Okay. The most important thing is basically to transport thyroid hormones. It basically binds to the carrier protein. Now the carrier protein allow even distribution of these lipid soluble entities. That means the T3 and T4 in the circulation. Okay. The free fraction is the major determinant. So the free fraction are very small amount, because when it came to the nearer to the cell, that's where it become available to the cell. It also allows the rate of hormone turnover and also metabolic state of the individual. And that also regulate the thyroid, hypothalamic pituitary thyroidal axis. Okay. So this is another aspect on the summary of the TH production. So I just skip this one. You can read there. So describe how thyroid hormone is transported to the cell intracellular space and bind to the intracellular receptors. This one already mentioned, basically to the transport protein. Okay. Then T3, T4 basically enter into the cytosol. This is where the receptor is present. Okay. The binding of these receptors basically activates your thyroid hormone receptor. Sorry, T3 basically activates the thyroid hormone receptor that activates the gene synthesis. So what does the gene synthesis happens? The gene transcription is going to produce RNA and basically going to increase the sodium potassium pump in the cell. So from there, all the sodium potassium pump that is going to attach to the basolateral membrane increase the breakdown of ATPs. There is also gluconeogenesis increase, respiratory enzyme increase, myosin heavy chain increase, soya beta adrenergic receptor become more, and many other things. So basically, it affects the cell by basically affecting the transporter, basically the transporter or the channel proteins, and also the enzyme. Mechanism of action, because once we know how this actually affect individual cell, we will basically able to list down the physiological effect of TSH. Okay. So what is the physiological effect? Basically, it regulates basal metabolic rate. What we mean by basal metabolic rate, that means the basic or the base of our body heat that is produced, activities. Okay, and also regulate the intake of oxygen. If our basal metabolic rate increases, that means more oxygen is required, because it's going to break down ATP to become ATP, so you require more oxygen. Okay. And then you regulate the cellular metabolism, which means that it stimulates synthesis of proteins, we know that gluconeogenesis is going to happen, more glucose is going to be utilized to break down to become ATP to be used by the sodium potassium pump. So all this is going to be affected. And also there's increased breakdown of lipids because this lipid becomes and it's going to lower down the cholesterol level because of the breakdown of lipids as a substrate for glucose synthesis. Okay, it also regulates growth and development. Basically, it regulates growth of the cell because it regulates sodium, potassium pump, and all the enzymes required for the development and growth of the cell. Okay. Can I stop here for a while? For 10 minutes? We come back at 10:05.
All right, then sure.
Okay, so we break for about 10 minutes, yeah? We come back about, what you want, 10? Is that okay? Oh, you have any question? We start at 10. Okay?
All right.
Okay, we start at 10. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. I hope everyone is back now. Hello.
Salam Dr. Yeah.
So you can hear me? Okay. Before I start, any questions before I move on? Is there any question that you want to ask?
Doctor, could you repeat back the mechanism of thyroid hormone towards intracellular receptor again?
Mechanism of thyroid hormone.
Yes, into cells.
Okay. Okay, I'll go back to the slides that we talk about here. So if you refer to your modules, you will find this slide. Okay, your T3 and T4, once it's released, it will get into the cytoplasm. Okay, it's not really any transporter here. So we basically feel that they are directly, because they are lipid soluble, so basically they will diffuse through directly to the cell membrane. Okay, once in the cytosol, it will go and find its intracellular receptors. Okay, which is intranuclear receptors. Basically, it binds to the receptor and activated gene transcription. What it means by increasing gene transcription, it means you have a lot of this mRNA being formed. Okay, the most important thing, this mRNA is increase in sodium potassium pump. Okay, and a lot of gluconeogenesis. And if you know that at cell level there is increase in sodium potassium pump, there will be increase in breakdown of ATP. Okay, once there's increased breakdown of ATP, it's going to generate a lot of heat in the cell. Okay, and also gluconeogenesis, mainly these are the formation of glucose, and we know that glucose is required to form ATPs for the sodium potassium to function. Okay, and you have a lot of respiratory enzymes as we form basically to taking a lot of oxygen, and the myosin heavy chain, these are basically in the skeletal muscle and smooth muscle, so allow all these cells to function better. And there is increase in beta adrenergic receptors. These are very important because these receptors activate by sympathetic nervous system. So in the heart, it's basically going to increase the function of the heart. Heart has beta 1. Okay. And the blood vessels, some of the blood vessels like beta 2 and those in the respiratory, they have beta 2 receptors on the smooth muscles. So these are very important for the function of the cell. Okay.
All right, got it.
Okay. So we know that once we know this, the effect of the cell at cellular level, I mean the thyroid hormone, the thyroxine T3 at cellular level, okay, then we will know what will happen physiologically effect on the whole body system. So basically we know that with the thyroid hormones, it affect, actually it's not really very important, but it's still strictly not really says that it's not necessary for life. Without thyroid hormone, everyone can still survive, right? It doesn't kill the patient, the person. But what is important, it actually increase or help in the development, growth, and metabolism. Okay, so the thyroid hormones are important mainly for regulating the basal metabolic rate. You need a minimum basal metabolic rate for the enzyme to function, for the cell to grow. Without enough heat generated by the body, basically the cell enzyme activity is going to slow down, so it's going to affect growth and development. So many of these enzymes are very important for growth and development. So if there's any deficiency or excess state, this is the effect that we are going to see.
Doctor, you're cut.
Sorry, I cut off myself because I have an irritating the throat. Okay, so I go to the next slide. So the general effect is, as we say, is that it increases the nuclear gene transcription effect. Okay, and the most important enzyme, we know that they are all the protein enzyme, structural enzyme, and transport protein enzyme or proteins. These are all being actually increased, and also from there it increase all the metabolic activities. With an increase in the enzyme, all the metabolic or chemical reaction actually increases. That is to generate a certain heat. So if you know that if the heat that is generated the hypothalamus and it's going to suppress TRH release and also TSH and finally the thyroid hormone release. So all this is basically negative feedback to regulate the release of TH and T3 and T4. Okay, so the whole physiological effect is basically to utilize the food energy greatly accelerated. So the main thing is once you know that there is increased activity of sodium potassium pump or more sodium potassium pump is formed, it's going to utilize a lot of energy. So all the food that we take in will be actually broken down into energy for all the chemical reaction to occur. Okay, there will be increased protein synthesis. Okay, but the synthesis of protein also increased because of basically the structural protein and the enzyme proteins and also transport protein that is being increased. Okay, so for growth. So there is actually increased rate of protein catabolism. Yeah. So people who has hyperthyroidism, they are going to be basically thin, even though there's.
Doctor, you're cut. You were saying.
People who are hyperthyroidism, they also have increase in protein synthesis, but at the same time, they have increase in protein catabolism. There's actually breakdown of proteins in the way for gluconeogenesis. So this is where people who are hyperthyroidism, they are usually thin, lean, okay? And the mitochondria in most cells of the human body is basically increased in size and numbers, okay? And the total number of surface area for the mitochondria actually increase. So basically, proportionally, the mitochondria basically become more because you know that that's where mitochondria activity is to basically increase the is generating ATPs. Yeah, so it basically generating a lot of heat. So for young people, the growth rate is accelerated. Okay, the growth development of the brain during fetal life is actually accelerated, and all these are increased. Breakdown into glucose formation or more glucose, and also fat metabolism. So fat, cholesterol, all these are actually broken down for carbohydrate metabolism. Okay. So increased metabolic tissue more rapidly. So these are basically the same. Increased cardiac output is due to increase in beta adrenergic receptors. Increased receptors will increase the heart contraction rate, contractility, and also the stroke volume. Basically, the cardiac output will increase. So people who have high thyroidism, the cardiac output is going to increase. Okay, that's where the increased strength of the heart, even with a slight excess increase in thyroid hormone being secreted because of increase in a lot of adrenergic receptors. Okay, and the strength of contraction also basically increases. Okay, but if a long-term hyperthyroidism, after that is going to depress. Okay, so for chronic hyperthyroidism, this will be the effect. Okay. CNS effect, thyroid hormones, basically, you know, is going to cause excitability. So basically, the cognitive is going to increase. There will be actually a lot of muscle increase, become more vigor, and quantity of hormone increases. But as the number increases, the muscle become weak because of the excess protein catabolism. Yeah. So even though there is a lot of myosin chain being formed, but there is also a lot of protein that is going to be broken down for gluconeogenesis to form glucose and later to form ATP for sodium potassium pump activity. So in the long run, increased thyroid hormones actually break down more protein than actually is synthesized. Okay, and as more and more thyroid hormone is formed, basically chronic hormones, people will find difficult to sleep. Very alert. Okay, other effect, there will be increased secretion of digestive juice, increased motility because of increase in body temperature with some metabolic rate. That's where all this actually help to increase digestion, to take in more, absorb more glucose, and also fat, and also amino acid. Increased rate, most of the endocrine cell, basically insulin is increased, parathyroid is increased. Okay. So in summary, thyroid hormones, the effect is basically increased cardiac output, increased oxygenation of the blood because of increased breathing rate. Effect is basically carbohydrate metabolism, increased glycogen breakdown formation and in the liver, but also increased glucose uptake by the adipocyte, and that includes actually glucose formation because of increase in insulin. Okay. Effect on lipids, basically more lipid synthesized, more protein, you have more protein synthesis because of the formation of the enzymes and also for the transporter proteins. But there is actually a lot of protein actually being catabolized, especially in the muscles. Yeah, it actually stimulates the growth hormone secretion, promote bone growth, and also increase insulin. Because once growth hormone increase, you have IGF-1 increase, production by the liver. And in the nervous system, it promotes neural branchings and myelination of the nerve, basically make the nervous system more active. Okay. Now, what happens? We have hyposecretion and hypersecretion and hyposecretion. So the hypo one and also the hyper one, you can read this. So I'm not going to talk on that. But you look at, there's primary hypothyroidism. When primary hypothyroidism, basically we know the defect is due to the effect on the thyroid hormones, the thyroid glands. So the defective is either inflammation or there is a decrease in iodine deficiency. Okay, or you can actually use anti-thyroid drugs. So patient who use anti-thyroid drugs has this primary hypothyroidism because there's a decrease in T3 and T4. Okay, and congenitally defect, there may be some problems in the thyroid tissue. Secondary hypothyroidism. Okay, so the primary thyroid tychosis excess where is usually will cause grave disease. Okay, toxic and multinodular goiter and all this. Basically, these are primary. Yeah, and then the secondary are usually very rare. Okay. And then what happens when you have this is, okay. Goiter is any conditions that cause enlargement of the thyroid gland. It can also means hypo or even hyper. Thyroid hormones are production level. Too little being produced. So this, we have to basically check to see which are the one. So if the person have goiter, doesn't mean that is hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. Okay. So the enlarged gland can be either due to also diffuse or nodular. So you have to really physically check and also test the hormones that is present in the blood. Okay. So the factors that can cause the thyroid gland to be enlarged. So this in your module, so I'll just leave for you to read. Yeah. Okay. We have finished thyroid glands. Any questions? Before I go to calcitonin. No? No questions. So the same thing, calcitonin, describe the chemistry of calcitonin, control of calcitonin secretion and physiological effect of calcitonin, and describe at molecular level. So what is calcitonin do? Okay, calcitonin is basically a hormones produced by your parafollicular cell, the C cell in the thyroid glands, and these are diffusely present in the thyroid glands. Okay, so it's not specifically located anywhere. Yeah. But the most important thing for thyroid calcitonin is it helps to regulate the calcium level through calcium receptors on the parafollicular cell. So the parafollicular cell has calcium receptors that associates the blood calcium levels. Okay, and this actually acts by GQ, the calcitonin effect on on the cell is only two cells. It's either in the bone or the kidney. Okay. the main purpose is basically calcitonin is to decrease the plasma calcium and also phosphate concentration. Yeah. So they mainly act by inhibiting osteoclast, and we know that osteoclast is the one that is going to digest the bone and increase release of calcium. So if you inhibit osteoclast activity, basically you're going to reduce the calcium level, and that is when there is high level of calcium in the blood. Okay. The other one is inhibit renal tubular calcium reabsorption. So basically it prevents calcium from being reabsorbed, so more calcium can be excreted to help to reduce the plasma calcium level and also phosphate. Okay, even though they are not critical in regulating calcium homeostasis, if you totally remove the thyroid gland, it doesn't really produce a major change, because we know that calcium homeostasis is also regulated by parathyroid and also vitamin D. Okay, so it's not saying it's not really important. It's not really very C cell is present in the thyroid glands. But we actually use calcitonin therapeutically. That means you actually use for treatment to prevent bone loss. People old age, they actually take calcitonin to prevent bone loss, and also for short-term treatment of hypercalcemia malignancy. Okay, we finished with calcitonin. Okay, now we look at parathyroid gland. Okay, parathyroid glands. We'll look at the location. Okay, they are basically pea-sized, located on the top and the bottom posterior border of the lateral lobes of the thyroid. That means it's located on both the left and the right lobe. Okay, one on the top and one on the bottom. So basically, there are about 4 pea-sized glands located on the thyroid glands, and they are highly or richly vascularized. This chief cell is the one that actually secrete PTH, parathyroid hormones. Yeah. The same thing as I say, parathyroid hormones are important in calcium metabolism. So their role is basically to regulate the calcium level and also the bone mass, and also excretion of phosphate and activation of vitamin D. So what does it do is basically has 4 effects. One is to regulate the calcium level in the blood, bone mass, and also the the renal excretion of phosphate and vitamin D. So PTH is playing a central role in calcium homeostasis. Yeah, compared to calcitonin, PTH is more important in regulating the calcium level. Okay, so the calcium level, the chief cell itself is basically detecting that. Okay, so this is the regulation. If you have high calcium level, it's going to inhibit the release of PTH. Activates bone resorption of calcium, and also increase intestinal resorption of calcium together with vitamin D. Okay, and also increase calcium reabsorption from the kidney. Okay, so the regulation synthesis is basically as a pre-pro-peptide that is then rapidly cleavage to become pro-peptide and subsequently become PTH. Yeah. So the release is controlled by a very tight feedback system of plasma calcium concentration. That means the calcium concentration, high calcium concentration, high calcium level suppress PTH release, and low stimulate the release. So it has a receptor that actually sense, and this is basically a G protein coupled receptors. Okay, that sense the calcium level, and it can be either GQ or GS, GQ or GI. Yeah, so it not particularly specific. Okay, and anything like so this is just the opposite. Yeah, and it works by actually on the plasma membrane of the parathyroid chief cell, the kidney cell, and also the C cell, thyroid C cell. Mechanism of action. Okay, its primary target is basically on the PTH receptor, there is G protein couple receptors, and there's GS, GQ. Target is on kidney and bones. Yeah. As we know, if there's GS, basically PKA, we know there's increased induced genes transcription. And if it works on the bones, basically to increase bone mobilization so that you can actually increase the calcium levels and also increase absorption together with vitamin D to actually increase intestinal absorption and also in the renal to increase renal reabsorption. Yeah, to increase the primary hyperthyroidism is due to usually the tumor, parathyroid tumor. Okay, that when you have high calcium or high parathyroid hormones, what it did is basically it elevates the blood calcium concentration. So what is the effect of increased blood calcium level? It's going to cause a lot of muscle contraction, and we know that calcium is required for muscle contraction. Okay, and it also causes kidney stone and also cause a lot of osteoporosis in the bones. Okay, secondary hyperthyroidism, and this is in the kidney, and it basically not able to absorb calcium, reabsorb calcium. And diet deficiency in calcium and vitamin D or phosphate, they can cause secondary hyperparathyroidism. So when the kidney is not able to absorb calcium, the low calcium actually increase parathyroid hormone secretion. Okay, to try to reabsorb, increase back the calcium level in the blood. Okay. Yes. No? Okay, if not, then I'll just move on to vitamin D. Okay. So why is vitamin D considered vitamins and also a hormone? Okay. You can find the answers in the modules. But basically, okay, vitamin D is lipid soluble, and we know that they are lipid soluble, and most of them are derived from the plant as a precursor, and also from the milk that we take, and even fish, cod liver oil, and even to a certain extent the eggs. Okay, vitamin D is present. Okay, and it exists in our body in two forms. There is the vitamin D3 and D2. Okay, and the vitamins is required because it's considered a hormone and biologically synthesized in the cell. Okay, and before it becomes an active form. So physiological action is basically by transcription of variety of proteins, action on target cell to regulate body mineral and skeletal homeostasis. Okay, it basically regulate also cell growth. Action is mainly on the small intestine, bone, kidney to prevent a normal decline or rise in plasma calcium level. So your vitamin D is more like a stabilizing effect. What it did is basically enhance calcium absorption by producing a lot of color binding. That means protein. Proteins in this is color binding that is able to bind more calcium cytoskeletally. So how is vitamin D involved in the metabolism and calcium involved in hormone secretion? We already mentioned that with calcium, you allow exocytosis of vesicles, so that's where calcium skeletal muscle and smooth muscle contraction, and also increase the nerve conductivity, exocytosis of vesicles, and also activation of enzymes. Some enzymes require calcium for it to function. Okay. That's very brief on vitamin D. Any questions? You can read most of that in the modules. Yeah? Any questions on vitamin D? No?
I think no, Doctor.
No. Doctor, one question.
Okay.
You said that PTH also stimulates the activity of vitamin D, right?
Yes. No, PTH, yeah, they work together.
So but then PTH increases the excretion of phosphate, but vitamin D increases the absorption of phosphate in the intestine. So
yeah,
is either one of it like more than the other?
No. Basically, you look at in calcium phosphate metabolism. Yeah. Can I come to this one to explain that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's say we look at high calcium level in the blood. So the first thing you look at calcium in the blood is going to stimulate the C cell to release calcitonin, right? Because calcitonin release is basically to inhibit the osteoclast activity. That's basically to decrease the calcium level. Okay. But as the calcium level decreases, it's going to stimulate the PTH to basically release the parathyroid glands to basically release PTH. Once PTH release, is going to increase the bone matrix reabsorption. So it's the balance between the PTH and calcitonin that is going to affect the bone function. I mean the osteoclast function. Okay. From here, basically the PTH is going basically is vitamin D. Right. So as more vitamin release, you can have vitamin D to stimulate the absorption of calcium from the blood. What does vitamin D do to the endothelial cell? Is basically to help enterocyte, basically to help bindings of calcium, so reabsorption of calcium into the ECM. Okay, so the effect of vitamin D is the one that basically going to increase the high level from the food reabsorption. That's going to increase that back again to high level, and this is going to affect the calcitonin again. So all these three hormones actually work in concert to regulate the calcium levels. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So the regulations of this, basically these three hormones are important. But let's say a person doesn't have calcitonin. Affect much on the calcium level because it's still regulated by parathyroid hormones. Okay, the parathyroid hormones will basically going to be secreted if there is low calcium level, or suppressed when the calcium level is high. Okay, so even the person without thyroid glands, that means the C cell, basically is still able to regulate the calcium level, because calcitonin is one of the three hormones that regulate calcium level in the blood. Okay, any questions? No? Okay, the same thing, what about phosphate? If you have high phosphate level, you are going to suppress or increase PTH release?
Increase.
Yeah?
Increase.
It's going to increase PTH release, basically. What's that?
Doctor, you were cut off just now.
Yeah.
After PTH
so PTH, yeah. PTH, what happens when PTH increase is still going to stimulate the kidney to reabsorb more calcium, but actually excreted more phosphate. Is that okay? Okay. I think that's all I have. If you have more questions, then we can discuss. If not, we can go back to the previous slide. Previous classes on stress, or any of the things that you want to discuss. Is there any questions?
Doctor, can you just repeat again what happens when you have low phosphate?
Okay. What happens when you have low phosphate? We go to the slides and see. Okay. Okay, what happens when we have low phosphate? Okay, as we say just now, just try to find the slide so it explains to you. Look at PTH. PTH release is basically tightly regulated by the plasma concentration of calcium. That means calcium. If you have high calcium, you suppress PTH release. But if you have high phosphate, you increase the PTH release. Okay. So now what happens if you have low phosphate? You are going to suppress PTH release, but it also being regulated by calcium. Okay. So if let's say you have low phosphate, you know that increased PTH release is going to cause kidney to excrete more phosphate. When you are low pH, so basically PTH release is going to be suppressed. Is that okay?
Yes, doctor, but that would also bring down the calcium, right?
Yeah, but there are other things like vitamin D and your D2, the 125, the D2 can actually be activated, so it can actually increase the calcium level, even your calcitonin. Okay, so all these things actually work in concert. Yeah, so we have to the three hormones working in concert to regulate their calcium level and also the phosphate. Okay, but more important actually regulating the calcium level than phosphate. Is that okay?
Yes, doctor, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? No? No, if not, I'll pass to Dr. Liana. You can start with the IRAC and then we will come back at about 11:30 or 11. You want to start at 11:30? Yeah? We'll start at 11:30 because we are going to look at the pancreas, endocrine pancreas, and then probably that I can finish quite early, so we probably will start at 11:30. Yeah? Is that okay?
All right, doctor.
Yeah. So you wait Dr. Liana to take over.
Okay. Amar, can you please release the attendance, please?
Yeah, sure. All right, sending the meeting chat.
Okay, so we can discuss while you submit the form. Okay. Can you see my slide?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, good. Thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH or thyrotrophine, A level B secretion is stimulated directly by high circulating free thyroid hormones level. C stimulates almost all steps in thyroid hormone synthesis. D stimulates the activity of parafollicular steroid. What do you think is the best answer?
C.
Yes, it stimulates almost all steps in thyroid hormone synthesis. Why is A wrong? So basically, A is a state. TSH level can tell us whether our thyroid function is functioning well or not. So do you think TSH is a good?
It's not a good level to tell.
Because TSH is secreted by anterior pituitary, not
So
thyroid.
basically, your primary thyroid diseases are due to what? So what Dr. Hafiz is telling you, the primary thyroid diseases are actually, the deficiency or the hyperproduction of the thyroid hormone, right? So if it's a secondary disease, then mostly comes from the upper of the
pituitary gland.
or the hypothalamus. But the primary diseases are due to the thyroid hormone. So it's not a good index to know whether your glands are functioning well or not. B, secretion of stimulated directly by cause. Why?
Should be inhibited.
Yeah,
should be
inhibited.
negative feedback.
Yeah. Yes, the negative feedback. Good. Okay. And then of D is wrong because what does the parafollicular
secretes calcitonin. It has nothing to do with thyroid.
Yeah, and then what stimulates the secretion of the calcitonin?
Calcium level.
Yes, the ionized calcium, right? Why the statement C says almost all steps in thyroid hormone? Why does TSH only stimulate almost all steps in thyroid hormone?
Because TSH actually helps with the intake of iodine, the iodination process, and the proteolysis.
What are thyroid hormones?
Peptide hormones.
Yeah, but the TSH say that TSH only. Sorry, Tara? Sorry?
Modifies the gene expression, so it will cause transcription of the proteins required for the uptake of the iodine and the enzymes for the formation of your thyroid hormones.
But they say that it stimulates almost all steps in the thyroid hormone synthesis. Yeah, you're right. And then for question number 2, most or more active form of thyroid hormone in the blood is
A, deodination.
Deodination.
Yes, the A is the correct answer. All the others are wrong, right? Okay, so we are done. So we see you back at 11:30, right?
Yes, 11.